Welcome to part 2 of our unit on presidential elections. Last time we talked about political parties, how they work, and what they do. This time we're focusing on primaries and caucuses and answering the question, why doesn't everyone run for president in the United States? So grab your ticket, find your seat. The learning train is leaving the station. Choo choo!
Okay, essential question. Primaries and caucuses. What are they and what purpose do they serve? Well, primaries and caucuses are a series of elections that run in all 50 states that narrow down who will run for president for each political party. This process takes months, as the elections don't happen all at once, but when it's all said and done, a winner emerges for each party that will run for president for their party. To make this easier to understand, I think we need an analogy. When I think about primaries and caucuses, I think about football. More specifically, NFL football. And even more specifically, the Super Bowl. If you were to ask any coach at the beginning of the year if they would like their team to play in the Super Bowl, they would all say yes. Well, of course they would. The whole purpose of a football team is to get to the big game. Now, let's say you're in charge of the Super Bowl. As much as you would like to, you wouldn't be able to let everyone play in the Super Bowl because there's only room for 2 teams. So what does the NFL do? They have playoffs.
Playoffs? Don't talk about playoffs. You kidding me? Playoffs?
Playoffs are a way to decide who gets to play in the Super Bowl and ultimately who wins the Super Bowl. The point of playoffs are to eliminate the teams until only 2 remain to play in the Super Bowl. In the NFL, there are 2 conferences or groups of teams. 1 team from each group will play in the Super Bowl. Throughout the playoffs, teams play each other, and when they lose, they are eliminated and the winning team moves to the next round. This continues until only 1 team remains for each group to play in the Super Bowl. So in our analogy, the 2 conferences are like the Republicans and Democrats. The playoffs are like the primary and caucus system, and the Super Bowl is the presidential election. You see, just like there's a lot of teams that want to play in the Super Bowl, there are also a lot of people that would like to be president of the United States. But just like how every team can't play in the Super Bowl, not everyone who wants to can run for president. To run for president, you need lots of money. And I mean lots. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And most people don't have the kind of money to run for president, so they rely on the political parties we talked about in our last video to supply that money. As we talked about last time, the 2 main political parties are the Democrats and Republicans, and the winner of the primaries and caucuses is the person who gets to use the party's money to run for president. There are a few differences between the NFL playoffs and the presidential elections. I mean besides the pads, uniforms, and referees. In the playoffs, teams are paired and play each other directly. This doesn't happen in primaries and caucuses. Instead of weekly games that pit one candidate against another, there are a series of elections that happen over several months and include all of the candidates. The first caucus is always held in Iowa. So, what is a caucus and how is it different than a primary? In a caucus, a room full of party members, so Republicans in a Republican caucus and Democrats in a Democrat caucus, gather together to decide who should represent their party in the main presidential election. Different parts of the room represent different candidates who are running. People stand in the candidate's area they would like to win. The candidate with the least number of people in their corner, so to speak, is eliminated from the caucus. Between votes, people talk to each other and try to persuade people to come to their candidate's corner. The votes continue until someone has a majority of the people in their corner. Whoever wins gets the delegates for that state. The bigger the state, the more delegates it's worth. Now what about primaries? The first primary happens in New Hampshire. A primary is a secret ballot vote, meaning that people in the state go to the polls and vote for the candidate they want to represent their party. In a primary election, more people are involved in the process, but there is no discussion between voters. When primary elections are held, there is a ballot for each party. Most primaries are closed. In a closed primary, you can only vote for the party you are registered with. In other words, if you're a registered Democrat, you can only vote with the Democrat ballot. If you're a registered Republican, you can only vote for the Republican ballot. Now, if you're registered as an independent, which means you're not a part of either party, you may not get to vote at all. Some primaries are open primaries, which means you can use whatever party's ballot you want to, even if you belong to the opposing party. There are also semi-open primaries that allow independents or people who have chosen not to belong to a political party to vote with the party's ballot of their choosing. People who are registered with a party use their party's ballot in a semi-open primary. In open and semi-open primaries, people only get to use one ballot. They can't choose both. If someone wins a primary just like a caucus, they get the delegates for that state. Along the way, if people are not getting any or are getting very few delegates, they usually drop out of the race. Sometimes there is only one state who has a primary or caucus on a certain date. Other times there are groups of states having primaries and caucuses on the same day. One of the biggest days for primaries and caucuses is called Super Tuesday. It happens on a Tuesday, usually in March. It is called Super Tuesday because it is when the most states have their primaries and caucuses, which in turn means the most delegates up for grabs on the same day. After the primaries and caucuses are over, the person who won the majority of the total delegates available from all the states will get their party's nomination. The official nomination happens at each party's national convention. This is where leaders, delegates, and members of the party gather in a huge rally to count the delegates and officially announce the candidate their party will run for president. Most of the time, people know who will be announced, but to make it official, the delegates are counted and the nominated candidate gives a big speech, one that officially kicks off their run for president against the other party's nominee. Most conventions happen in September, and the general election, or Super Bowl of the elections, happens every 4 years in November. It is the general election where the entire country votes on the same day to see who will become the next president of the United States. So what? Well, if you can answer the following questions, then you've learned what you needed to know. What role do primaries and caucuses play in the presidential elections? What is the difference between a primary and a caucus? What happens at a party convention, and how is the nominee officially chosen? And bonus question, do you think primaries or caucuses are a better system for choosing candidates, and why? If you get that answered, let me know. You'll get some stripling dough. Tune in next time to find out how the Electoral College works.